Hello, everybody. Let's look at some games from the fourth Grand Prix that just started. Here in this game, we look at the game between Maxime Vachier LaGrave with the white pieces versus Boris Gelfand with the black pieces. Let's get into it. So e4, c5, knight of 3, knight c6. Probably get some kind of accelerated dragon. The deal, knight c3, g6. There it is, d4. And we have an accelerated dragon. And you can look that up if you're not sure what it is, but the basic premise is that black is looking for an opportunity to play the move d5 in one move instead of playing d6 and then eventually working his way to d5. So therefore it's called the accelerated dragon. Bishop g7. Bishop e3, knight f6. Now the accelerated dragon tends to be more positional than the dragon. Now one of the reasons why is because you can't really, if black doesn't want you to, you really can't as white castle on the queen side in the accelerated dragon. It's really positionally, there's some tactics that really won't allow you to get a good position. I mean, you can try it, of course, but you won't be able to get a good position. There's too many tactics against the e pawn and such. So one of the most popular lines against the accelerated dragon is the Moraxi bind. Interesting enough, though, is with Vachier LaGrave's move order with this early knight c3. He kind of opts out of being able to play the Moraxi bind, which could occur after, say, d4. C takes d4, g6, and then c4, with this focus on these squares, and then later on, knight c3, here, etc. So with this move order, he opts out of that, and he plays into the this accelerated dragon. And here's the other variation that's played with bishop c4. And the idea is, of course, to keep black from realizing his dream of playing d5 in one move. Bishop c4. There's often tactics here after black castles to take with this knight. And a lot of lines in this opening revolve around sacrifices on e4, because of the pressure that gets built up in the position against the d4 square. So white has to be on constant alert. Again, as I was saying, there's tactics here with the idea of playing moves like knight takes. Like, for example, say if white didn't know what was going on and just castled, then knight takes e4. This is a common theme in all openings where the bishop comes to c4. So even in your e4, your classical king pawn openings, e4, e5, where the bishop comes to c4, and your Giuoco piano and bishop's opening, all the openings where the bishop comes to c4, this is a tactic that you always have to be on the lookout for. Knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and then d5 with the fork. And then black would realize his dream of the accelerated dragon, because he was able to play d7 to d5 in one move without having to stop at d6. This is why bishop b3 is played, and of course this gives black time. Sorry about that. So knight f6, bishop c4, castle, bishop e3, and now d5. Wait a minute, stop the presses. Now, all of these moves are designed to stop d5. You got the pawn on e4, knight guarding e5, bishop on d5, bishop guarding d5. What in the world is going on? Okay. Now, if d5 is possible, it kind of refutes white's whole setup, pretty much. Let's see what happened. So now it's a battle, because white either has to show and prove that d5 is a mistake, or he has to allow black to totally free his game. If black is able to do that, then black was definitely gonna be better. So here the battle continues. Normally at this point, black will acquiesce and play d6. With the long fight ahead. Okay. So Gelfand plays d5. He takes d5. So Vachier LaGrave is up for the challenge. And now knight a5. Now, to understand what's going on, just look at this pawn as an isolated pawn. We know it's not isolated because there's this pawn on c2. However, we know that an isolated pawn is called that because it cannot be protected by pawns in the adjacent files. So we consider this pawn right here that we're looking at, that I have highlighted as an isolated pawn, because for all intents and purposes it cannot be protected. That c pawn is not getting to c4 anytime soon. So therefore it's treated as such. How do we treat isolated pawns? Well, when you're playing against them, you want to attack the pieces that protect the isolated pawn. Okay? Because if you get rid of the pieces, then that's protecting the pawn, isolated pawn becomes weaker and weaker, and then you can just win it. So this is what LaGrave is out to do. Castle, knight takes b3. Right? So he gets the bishop. I'm sorry, Gelfand. Blah, I messed this up. Gelfand has the black pieces, and Gelfand snatches the bishop here now. So he's feeling, hey, I can just win this pawn back. But it's up to Vachier LaGrave to show and prove that d5 was a mistake by Gelfand. Okay, so Gelfand is playing against the isolated pawn, right? He's treating it as an isolated pawn. He's trying to win it, but so far you have two defenders against two attackers. Okay, that's not enough to win. So the next logical move is what? You got to put another attacker on this pawn. So the logical sequence is b6 and bishop b7. There it is, b6. And now LaGrave plays a good move. Plays d6. The idea is he understands that, hey, I might lose this pawn, but if he loses it, he's going to saddle black with a weak pawn that he can turn around and pressure and perhaps win and still be up a pawn anyway. With that said, however, possible was just queen d2. And say after bishop b7, right, putting more pressure on the pawn. Why not rook a d1? Okay. Now perhaps LaGrave was concerned with sweet sequence like queen e8. Let's say after rook actually I would like to trade these bishops off, but let's just play rook fe1 for argument's sake. Rook d8. And now this queen doesn't look good with this rook right here in front. And then there's really no way to hold on to this pawn. For instance, bishop d4, knight takes d4, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, knight d5, rook d5, and queen c3. Check, getting out of the the opposition of the rook, and king g8. And after this mass exchange of pieces, these players are pretty close to being able to shake hands. So LaGrave was like, hey, I'm going to lose this pawn, but let me lose it in the most economical way. Let me mess up my opponent's position. So of course he would love Gelfand to play this, or queen takes d6 and then trade off and go into this ending, right, where he has some winning chances with no chance of losing. Gelfand is stubborn, so Gelfand is like, you know what? I'm not going to ruin my position. But what I'm going to do is I'll just block the squares around the pawn so that the pawn can't be defended. I'll still put my bishop here. I'll control these squares, and then I'll just pick up the pawn without ruining my pawn structure. So he's trying to basically have his cake and eat it too. Queen f3. So now the rook is attacked, so black must take some time out to deal with that situation. Rook b8, and now piece comes to defend the pawn. So still, Gelfand is still not able to take this pawn. There's a bishop, and now queen h3 takes place. And now there's ideas like bishop h6, trading off this powerful bishop on the board. Rook c8, and now bishop d4 instead. Of course, the queen still cannot take the pawn. Notice how annoying that is, that pawn is just there and just creating havoc psychologically for Gelfand, who has to constantly, think about it. Nimzovich said a passed pawn is like a criminal that needs to be locked up, and it's true, because it's stressful having a pawn that deep in your position, right? Because you constantly have to you got to look for the sacrifice of it. You have to look for all type of tactics involving it, and it just takes away energy from your position. So bishop d4 was played. Here's the plan. Again, remember, cut off the attack, or cut off the support from the pawn, and now just pick it up. But it seems like Vachier LaGrave always has like one more move. Plays knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, right? Surely the pawn can be won right now, right? Rook ac1. Again, this foils black's plans, because if queen takes d6, c4 wins, because you have this rook here and queen here. This is bad opposition for black, right? There's no way to deal with this. For instance, if rook takes, this bishop is in bad position. This is why rook ac1 is played. b5. Now that I showed you that variation, you know why b5 is being played by Gelfand. It's to stop this pawn advance to c4. So now surely, right, he can win the pawn. But now let me just point out another thing, and this happens a lot, is that sometimes you're trying to stop your opponent from certain ideas, and you make weakening moves. Now b6 was played, so now you have these squares. These squares are permanently weak after this pawn advance, right? These things are important, because you can't take back pawns. All right. Queen g3. You see how Vachier LaGrave always has like one move. I still can't win the pawn. Queen f6. Now, just looking at this pawn. This move, right? Natural looking move, right? You figure you win the pawn now. But the problem is, and I wanted to illustrate this point to you, is now b5 is an issue. You see? So you play that now, and you got knight d4. And let's say rook takes, knight takes b5. Still losing the pawn. Rook b6. And then c4, you see, and then you got the same issue. So you got to be careful with the pawn move. So yeah, you solve one problem, and now you got another problem in the midst. So queen f6, what to do? Knight d4 again. There's the new problem we talked about. Defense combined with attack, defending this pawn, but attacking this pawn. b4 from Gelfand. Again, the further advance of the pawn on a solo mission like that means that ultimately it'll probably be doomed. So b4 is played, and now c4. Very powerful move. B takes c3, and rook takes c3. Rook takes c3. B takes c3. Now, the problem in this position now is these pawns have the potential to become connected. We have two wide open files. Now it's starting to get dangerous. If bishop takes a2, then simply just d7. And let's say bishop d5. You got to move to queen c7, rook d8, and now c4. Hitting this guy here, and then this pawn marches up to support this pawn. So rook d8 is played instead of bishop takes a2, a4. Surely, right? Now you got to get the pawn, right? You got the rook attacking the pawn and the queen attacking the pawn. All right? However, there's always some funny stuff going on. I told you, Vachier LaGrave stays 1 point ahead. And remember, if you don't learn anything from this game, learn that every pawn move leaves behind some kind of weakness. Remember, I showed you before how those squares became weak after the B pawn was advanced. Again, this pawn being advanced, right, attacks this knight, but it leaves this bishop unprotected. So this gives Vachier LaGrave the out that he needs. So he plays knight f5, check. He can do that because e6 to e5 has left that bishop unprotected, right? And now, for one more move, black cannot get a hold of this this pawn right here. Queen takes f5, rook takes d5, and guess what? The d6 pawn is still protected. And to boot, this pawn is actually attacked 2 times by white. But he's not interested in that pawn. He's interested in holding that pawn and this pawn. These are the ones that are gonna be the breadwinners. Queen e4, c4. Again, it's protecting and mixing with defense. If queen takes c4, then this pawn is gonna drop with check. And say after king g8, just d7 with more threats. Queen c8, of course, x-raying, attacking this pawn and x-raying to e8 and just preventing this. Rook d6, queen c1, king h2, queen h6, and now black is lost for all intents and purposes. Let's go back. So after c4, f6 was played, obviously protecting that, again creating more weakness in the position. Again, now this square is weak. Queen c3, check. King h2, queen takes a2. That pawn is totally irrelevant in the position. These are the important pawns. Rook d2, that not only protects this pawn right here, but it cuts the queen off from being on that side of the board. You know, in this game it's clearly won now for white. So you don't want this queen, you know, getting over here, checking and carrying on, and you know, checking here, trying to take this pawn and just harassing the king. This move cuts the queen off. Okay, this move wants to prevent that from happening with this threat right here, taking the pawn. G3, dealing with the issue. Now queen is trying to blockade. Queen is normally not the best blockader because it's a high value piece. That's why knights are the best blockaders, because not only are they a lower value piece, but the way that the way they move is very useful, because the knight can be behind the pawn but still exerting a great influence in the position. Rook d7, so now you have this double blockade. Queen c4, and Gelfand resigned. There's really no plan to deal with the idea of queen d5. Queen d5, and then, you know, once you say rook takes the queen d5, rook d5, and this the advance of the 2 pawns, and it is over with. So this is why Boris Gelfand resigned. Fantastic game by Vachier LaGrave. It only took him 34 moves, and you got to see why the move D5 is not really played, not really supposed to be played in an accelerated dragon like this. Good effort, but um, by Gelfand and trying, because I mean he was so close to winning that pawn back on multiple occasions, but Vachier LaGrave showed his class and showed us all why this move D6 is usually the standard here in this position. So I hope you like that. Please subscribe and comment, and I'll see you on the next video.